that's fun. I will say I'm a little bit nervous that Denise Barth has joined. Now there are 3 principals that have been over my boys. So you guys keep it to yourself. Denise, keep my boys' problems to yourself. There are no problems. They're perfect. But Jeff Timoni was the principal at Kelly Middle last year, where Ethan is, and Baron Davis was the principal at Spring Valley, where Anson is. Jeff Timoni is going to be Anson's principal. And Denise Barth, God bless her, she had Anson at North Springs for 3 years. So when he was a tiny little boy, when he was a nice boy. So I will move on. I'm excited today to introduce Dan Dennis. And I met Dan a couple of years ago and have gotten to know him. He's the owner of Dennis Corporation, an engineering, surveying, and construction management firm with offices throughout South Carolina and a staff of 60 professionals. He is a 1990 Citadel graduate with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, and he also has a Master's in Business Administration from the Citadel. He serves on multiple boards, but a couple that I felt were noteworthy. Number 1, he's chairman of the South Carolina Small Business Regulatory Review Committee, and that is a governor-appointed position. And most importantly, he is a member of the board of directors for the Greenwood Genetics Center. And that's why he's here to talk today. One thing that I connected with Dennis about the 3rd or 4th time that I met him is that we both have kids that have genetic abnormalities. And so the work that they do at the Greenwood Genetics Center is important to both of us. He is married to Esther Dennis, and he's the father of Millie Dennis. She was born in 2005 with Down syndrome. So please join me in welcoming Dan Dennis.
Glad to be here, folks. General, good to see you again. Go Bulldogs. Let's see, I got my clicker, and I'm going to be done by 1:50, I promise you.
What?
Take that up. I'm glad I'm following Governor Haley from last week, because that meant the sheriff showed up today. So, appreciate that, Sheriff. I wouldn't want to miss you. And I'm glad that I'm doing the intro for Steve Spurrier Jr. At first I thought it was Steve Spurrier, but same thing, so, but that'll be fun. Jed, thank you for having me here. Elise, of course. And with me today from Dennis Corporation is Matt Nuss. Matt is in our marketing division, and he put together this PowerPoint I'm about ready to give you. Just a few things before we get going with the PowerPoint. I want to kind of tell you a story before why I'm even involved with the Genetics Center. Elise mentioned Millie, who's Esther and I, our daughter. She's 8 years old. We, at first, many years ago, tried to have children the old-fashioned way, and like most parents, it seems like these days are having trouble with that. And we tried for several years and went to see several specialists, and basically it was called some special medical term, but basically they said you may want to go see a reproductive specialist. So we did. We went up to Charlotte and sought help up there and advice from one of the leading endocrinological reproductive clinics in the country. And they said, well, why don't we'll try a few things, and then if that doesn't work, we'll maybe try artificial insemination, which is, test tube baby. It's certainly not inexpensive, and it's certainly a big decision to make in your life. So we really, had a tough time trying to decide what exactly was the right path for us. What did God really want us to do? We didn't really know. But we finally made that decision to go forward, and we did, and lo and behold, we conceived a child, Amelia Rose Dennis, commonly known as Millie. And I know a lot of you folks, both parents and grandparents, have a beautiful picture of your daughter or grandson on your kitchen table or in the living room. We actually have a picture of Millie, not when she was a day old or 6 days old, but actually when she was 6 cells. 6 human cells when they started dividing. So we have a picture of Millie, and she really hasn't quite figured that out yet, but she will one day. So during my wife's pregnancy, we noticed that there was some complications. Placenta previa was diagnosed halfway through the pregnancy, and it got progressively worse and worse. And the doctors were worried, but consequently, Esther, my wife, delivered. We were at Baptist, thankfully, and it was kind of touch and go, but Esther pulled out. She did really well. She lost a lot of blood, but Millie was fine. We were so told we had a beautiful, healthy, young little girl, baby girl, and we had to stay in the hospital for several days, 6 days, for my wife to recuperate from the placenta previa procedure. And the day we were getting ready to leave the hospital, and I do not like hospitals, I'm almost phobic of them, the pediatrician, our pediatrician came in, and he's a young fella, very, very smart though, and I could see he had that look on his eyes that something just wasn't quite right, and he was shaking. I knew he didn't want to tell us what he wanted to tell us, and he said that, I want to keep you overnight, an extra night, because I think your daughter may have Down syndrome. And I said, "Whoa, are you crazy?" I said, she doesn't have Down syndrome. And he said, well, she has some phenotypes, which is a fancy word for features that would lead certain experts to think so. So he said, I want to take a genetic sample and get it sent off and see if we're right or not. And hopefully we're wrong and everything will be fine. So we were shell-shocked, you can imagine. Packed up, ready to go home and spend another night at the hospital. So the test came back, and the doctor said, well, I've got good news and bad news. And this is no joke, he was actually carrying some textbooks with him, so I knew we were in trouble. I'm like, oh boy. He said, your daughter has a rare form of Down syndrome. And I was like, wow. In the United States, of all the births that occur in a given year, maybe, I think, 3% are diagnosed with Down syndrome. And that is an extra chromosome for those of you who don't know. That's the one thing in life where you don't want to have an extra of. It causes a lot of issues, health and other issues. But he said she has a rare form, so not all of the cells in her body have the extra chromosome. So I was like, what does that mean? He said, well, we don't know. Science doesn't know. Some children with mosaic Down syndrome, that's what it's called, mosaicism, are higher functioning, and some are lower functioning than children who have full-blown Down syndrome with all of their cells having that extra chromosome. So that was our entry into the world of genetic disorders. And I'm an engineer, so I told myself I'm going to fix this problem. I fix problems all day long. I went to the Richland County Library. As soon as I got out of the hospital, I checked out every book they had on Down syndrome. I got on the internet and stayed up night after night after night reading about mosaicism and Down syndrome and everything you can imagine, and just trying to get my arms wrapped around it. And then somebody said, well, you need to go to the Greenwood Genetic Center. Those folks are the specialists. And luckily there is a satellite office here in Columbia. There's offices all over the state. And that is how we got introduced to the Greenwood Genetic Center. And Millie's doing wonderful. We got early intervention. When she was 6 months old, we got her immersed into physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. Why would speech therapy? Well, children with Down syndrome have low muscle tone. So one of the reasons why they have trouble speaking is they need to work the muscles in their mouth. And that wasn't known 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And that's why some of the older population have trouble speaking, while the younger population of Down syndrome folks do speak very well because you're using those muscles and doing certain exercises. So that's how we got involved with the Greenwood Genetic Center. And then I think I've been on the board now almost 3 years. So at a cocktail party, I ran into one of their geneticists who remembered me. And I told him how well Millie was doing. And next thing I know, I got a call from the director of the center, and he said, Dan, we would like you to serve on our board. So I've been on the board ever since, and it's been fascinating because now I'm getting to learn about all the new things that they're doing. South Carolina has Boeing. obviously down in Charleston, and we have BMW in Greenville. But many people don't know what we have in Greenwood, South Carolina. We have one of the world's leading genetic centers for research and treatment in the world. Not just this country, in the world. So, we're making big airplanes in Charleston and beautiful cars in Greenville, but every day in Greenwood, South Carolina, there's over 120 scientists, geneticists, PhDs, who are trying to figure out why certain things are happening, such as autism, Fragile X syndrome, Down syndrome, Asperger's syndrome, trying to figure out why that's happening, how it's happening, what are the signals for it in the body, can they be sampled, can they be tested, are the results accurate? So I'm going to get into all that now. So that's how I got immersed into the Greenwood Genetics Center. So I'm going to go through about 10 slides with you here. Now before I forget, if there's anyone in your family that has a child or anyone with a genetic disorder and you think you need help, will you let me know and I'm going to get you plugged in. I got about 50 business cards on the desk over there, so grab one. Email me directly and I'll tell you who to contact, either at the Columbia facility or our main campus in Greenwood or our satellite campuses around the state. Who are we? It's a nonprofit institute. We do 4 things, and we do it very well. The clinicians do genetic services, mainly meet with patients, determine what the potential problems are, do a lot of data collecting, and then next would be diagnostics, would be laboratory testing. Samples are taken, blood samples, tissue samples, and typically are sent to the main campus in Greenwood. And I've got a tour of all the facilities there. It's phenomenal what type of devices they have. They're these huge machines that are mapping the DNA and the genome that we read about, that we think is somewhere far, far away. No, it's right here in our own backyards. Of course, research, that is huge these days. The drug companies are desperate for something. Their big sellers are all petering out. They don't have these new drugs that are in the production line. So there's this huge gap. So they're just dying to get their hands on something that would be able to cure or fix or help alleviate some of these genetic disorders. And then education, that's a big component of what the Greenwood Genetics Center does. What are the goals? Obviously, to develop preventative and cures, obviously. But also to reduce the prevalence of these disorders, and that's through education. And I'll get to that a little bit later. And to care for the families that are impacted by these genetic diseases. When my wife and I first went to the Greenwood Genetics Center in Columbia, at their satellite office, we were basket cases. We really were. And we met with a genetic counselor. And to this day, he still works there, and I'm friends with him. I just ran into him the other day. And he sat us down and he explained to us that it's not the end of the world that you have a child with Down syndrome. And he worked with us and he helped educate us. And that is so important in those first few days and weeks after a diagnosis like that. What is the genetic evaluation? Well, they're looking for, of course, triggers. Developmental delays is an early trigger as a parent. If you see that, you need to act on it. And what is really hard to accept is when my wife and I meet parents who are in denial, and we see their child, and we know that that child has a disorder, and that parent is putting their head in the sand. And they're like, no, Johnny will be fine. Johnny will be fine. Well, Johnny won't be fine because Johnny doesn't speak well, or Johnny isn't learning properly, and he needs special help. And special is not a bad word. We're seeing a huge explosion in autism. The statistics are staggering. Something is not right. And I don't think, we're going to talk about autism tests here in a minute, but that is probably one of the fastest growing epidemics in the genetic world today. birth defects, growth delays, and then family history. That's a big thing. A lot of these genes are passed on. They may skip a generation, they may skip 2 generations, but they're still there. And there's a lot of debate over whether you want to get those tests and actually know that you're a carrier, and maybe your children or their children may have that same disorder or potential disorder. Family support. That's a picture there of the Buddy Walk, which is held every year across South Carolina, which is a national fundraising event for Down syndrome. And we participate in it every year. Greenwood Genetic Center is a big supporter of that, and all types of the groups that support these genetic disorder families. You know, there's autism networks, Down syndrome, you name it. They're out there, and they're constantly having fundraisers. And the good thing is most of that money is going into research and treatment. All right, let's talk about some breakthroughs. And this is real life stuff that's happening in Greenwood, and it's fascinating. I go to these meetings, I'm surrounded by doctors, I'm an engineer, and I'm like, wow, no wonder why these guys get paid so much. And ladies. Currently, there are no tests anywhere in the world that can accurately diagnose, detect autism or any of the similar type ASD disorders. There are none. However, research at the Greenwood Genetic Center has found that individuals with autism show a significant decreased, and this is a little technical here, but of a certain amino acid called tryptophan. And you can Google tryptophan, I've done it. Now, don't go running home and say there's a cure. There isn't a cure. There's just a test now that's in very early testing mode that is, let me put it this way. The doctors in Greenwood and the geneticists felt so strongly about this test and the early results that they got a patent on it. And as soon as they got a patent on it, they got calls from all over the world from some drug companies that wanted to partner with us. And we weren't getting those calls before we had this patent. So, but currently there's not enough data. Some more tests are going to be run. Some more population groups are going to be pulled together. Blood samples will be taken, tissue samples, and more tests will be run to see if this is really something that could possibly lead to detection. Some other things that we're doing in Greenwood, phenotype microarray technology. I have no idea what that is, but we talk about it in some of our board meetings. But all of these, the goal is to find some trigger or some just something that can give the geneticist a clue that maybe this is the indicator of a specific genetic disorder. That's the key. You know, there's got to be something in the body that can tell a geneticist that if too much of this or too little of this or the combination of this or that will cause one of these genetic disorders. Many of you know, and hopefully everyone in this room knows, and if you don't, you're going to know right now. If you are thinking about getting pregnant or are pregnant, hopefully you are taking folic acid. Why? Because it dramatically reduces the rate of neural tube disorders, i.e. spinal bifida. And it was first, that research was first discovered, I guess is a good word, by Dr. Stevenson, who was one of the founders for the Greenwood Genetic Center in Greenwood, believe it or not. And then the state of South Carolina, through funding, through various state agencies, had a huge education campaign to educate all 46 counties, and now, of course, it's all over the country and families all over the world. And that happened right here in Louisville, South Carolina. So if a woman is taking folic acid before conception, the numbers are staggering on the reduction of NDTs. In fact, you can see there at 60%. Some recent things that are happening on campus in Greenwood. We recently received a $2.75 million endowment from the Duke Foundation. Those aren't easy to get. We're partnering with Clemson University, and it's going to be a similar type campus as what is called commonly as CU ICAR up at Clemson, except it's going to be in Greenwood. Greenwood, we have about a 300-acre campus in Greenwood, and Clemson has bought some of that land, and they're getting ready to start to build their first genetic facility right next to one of our buildings there. And that's the start of a partnership that's going to last a long time. So they see their role in Greenwood and developing a similar type model that they have in the upstate for automobile technology, where if they build the building there in Greenwood, others will follow. All of the other medical enterprises that would go along with genetic testing would eventually come to that campus. Some recent awards, David Eversman, Dr. Everman received a very prestigious award, and so did Barbara, who she attends a lot of our board meetings. Again, the Institute, which is a nonprofit, was founded in 1974 through a large donation by the Self family, and the Selfs have been supporting the Greenwood Genetic Center ever since. It's amazing what that family does for Greenwood and the Greenwood Genetic Center. It was founded by Dr. Stevenson and Dr. Taylor. Dr. Stevenson is the Director Emeritus. There's a new CPO now, Dr. Skinner, and they're both just phenomenal. If there's a child in this state where a physician has trouble diagnosing at birth what the disorder may be, and they're exhausted all their resources, they'll call Dr. Stevenson. And typically within a day or two, Dr. Stevenson will have the diagnosis, with or without any genetic information. Man is phenomenal. And I think he's 75, and he works more than I do. And the home campus is in Greenwood, and there's 4 satellite offices, so you don't have to go to Greenwood in order to get support. You can go to one of those 4 offices. Folks, thank you so much.